Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin, Mr. Speaker, I beg of you a few seconds leave to really say to the family of Sister Lorna, who just a few minutes ago in a very sad way passed away from my constituency, that I really love them and I know what they're going through. And Sister Alfred, I know in your 90 years I know what you feel. But Mr. Speaker, I stand to contribute briefly to this motion. And the motion today seeks, the government seeks to borrow, Mr. Speaker, 54 million EC dollars, and it's for the purpose of financing the COVID-19 response project. And I concur with my colleague, the Member of Parliament for Dennery North, Mr. Speaker, when he said a while ago that it's very confusing. There are so many different names that this government has preferred for dealing with COVID-19. One time it's a response, another time it's a project, and it's difficult, Mr. Speaker, for you to truly understand what the government is trying to do. I understand it, Mr. Speaker. As I've said before in this House, this government comes to the Parliament with very confusing motions, and this is no mistake, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes people say they don't know what they're doing and they don't know what they're talking about. I've always said that they know exactly what they're doing, because you can't really follow what's happening, Mr. Speaker. I want to spend some time, Mr. Speaker, on the wording of the motion, as I try to do every time I speak in this House, because I know very well, Mr. Speaker, you're insisting that we stick to the motion. And I will continue to do my best to do just that. And so the purpose of the borrowing, Mr. Speaker, according to the government, is to finance the COVID-19 response project. And I repeat, to finance the COVID-19 response project. I wish throughout my presentation, Mr. Speaker, to draw the attention of this Honorable House to this part of the motion. The purpose is the financing of the COVID-19 response project. And in a while, Mr. Speaker, I will demonstrate to you and this House that there is no COVID-19 recovery project, none. Because the Prime Minister, in his presentation, Mr. Speaker, did not present us with a COVID-19 recovery project. And the very basis for which this motion is before the House is based on a false premise, Mr. Speaker. We are here going on to debate something that the Prime Minister did not present in this House. We are being asked to debate a motion which will allow the government to borrow 54 million EC dollars, and it's for the COVID-19 response project. Yet the Prime Minister did not present to this Honorable House the COVID-19 response project. What kind of thing is that, Mr. Speaker? So we are debating, we are firing blank shots from catapults, Mr. Speaker. There is no COVID-19 recovery project or response project. The Prime Minister did not present it. The measures that have been taken so far, Mr. Speaker, obviously include closing the country, social distancing, extended closing hours, and so on and so on and so on. The Prime Minister indicated this time that the loans which were supposed to be for the building of agricultural feeder roads, that loan was redirected for the COVID-19 response project, which he did not explain. And so I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, that once again this government has presented a motion, a very confusing motion, that does not speak to the actual tenets of the motion, and it's designed to confuse the people so that you cannot hold the government to proper account. This is what I believe. The Prime Minister said it's for health and safety of the population, it's for workers, and to stimulate the domestic economy. Very general terms, Mr. Speaker, but not speaking directly to what he says or what he refers to the COVID-19 response project. The Prime Minister also referred, Mr. Speaker, to the Social Stabilization and Economic Response Plan. And he indicated that aspects of that plan will form part of this COVID-19 response project. He spoke about the Victoria Hospital. But if you are dealing with a project, surely you should be able by now to tell us how much you would spend to continue to repair the Victoria Hospital, because you said it's a project. He spoke about the respiratory clinics around the island. Again, no mention of the cost. PPE equipment for medical staff. No mention of what quantity, what cost. The agricultural assistance program. No specifics, who will benefit, who will not benefit. He said something about the Love St. Lucia campaign, hobby farming, etc. And the only amount which was mentioned, Mr. Speaker, is 5 million EC dollars to the SLDB. And he indicated that the amounts had already been put in the budget. So the leader of the opposition asked this question and they laughed. So which is it? If the amounts are already in the budget, are they connected to the activities that are already in the budget? Since you are not being specific on the items that will be in this so-called COVID-19 response project. In other words, Mr. Speaker, I argue that again this government is very confusing. Very confusing, no specifics, so you cannot hold them to specific account. Just like the last time the Prime Minister indicated that 15-point-something million dollars was spent so far in the COVID-19 response. But if you add the figures, you will get well over $145 million that has been borrowed, Mr. Speaker. Again, no specific accounting, so you cannot pinpoint any specific activity with any specific amount to hold them to account. And if you go back to the law which was passed, the COVID-19 response law, the latest one, Mr. Speaker, you will note that on the procurement, you will note the latitude that is allowed to the government. So, Mr. Speaker, ça me ka dire comment ka commencer c'est ça. Gouvernement a encore venu au Parlement pour prêter l'argent. 54 millions de dollars, l'argent nous a servi à cette liste. En anglais, nous a dit ici dollars. Avec encore, moi, a dit chaque gouvernement vient prêter, c'est qualité l'argent ça là. Nous a dit c'est pour combattre les affaires COVID-19 là. Avec là, on a des manières, on a expliqué qui ça veut faire avec l'argent. Ou pas ça, je une pièce bagaille exactement ça yo ka fait. Quand ça si pour me demander une question demain ou bien après demain, la pas rien exactement ça me demander une question là. Parce que le premier ministre là pas ka ban nous pièce limo l'argent qui exactement. Ça me ka dit monsieur speaker ça me ka dit c'est un motion le gouvernement mené devant Kaila. Yo ka dit l'argent ça là c'est pour ça yo ka coulé en anglais the COVID-19 Response Project. Alors c'est un projet. Si on fait un CAI, on y puni un plan, c'est un projet pour bâtir un CAI. On y puni un plan, on y puni toute qualité bagaille, on y puni toute qualité, comment on peut concrète, comment on peut travailler. Ça c'est un projet. N'importe projet on peut faire, Mr. Speaker. C'est fourni comment, c'est fourni qui manière projet a commencé, qui manière projet a du bout, qui temps il a du bout. Ça c'est un projet. Le gouvernement vient ici et qui dit qu'il a fait un projet pour COVID-19 et qui voulait 54 millions de dollars. Mais il parle de nous pièces détail. Ça, le Premier ministre l'a dit. Il dit allez un plan interne avant. Un plan pour stabiliser social avec l'économie pays et pour qu'il y ait activité à dire là. Ça m'a dit c'est pas comme ça bagaille qu'a fait. Si vous venez au Parlement et vous dites c'est pour ouvrir 54 millions de dollars pour un projet. C'est faut venir avec comment on a dépensé en chaque matière en projet. Et ça me dit à M. Speaker, nous pas ni ça à debate ça là. Comme ça, nous avons debate un bagay qui est tête premier ministre là, ex-ministre gouvernement là. Comme ça, nous avons fait gros désordre, mais mon chemin yo mené ici, pas ni rien qui dit qui manière projet a commencé et qui ça projet a exactement. Yo dit yo kay faire bagay pour agricole, yo pas dit combien l'argent, yo pas dit si c'est la pêche, yo pas dit qui laisse. Avec ça moi ka dit c'est responsabilité premier ministre là pour faire ça. Si vousamenez un dit bête kay là, ou pas ka dit moun combien l'argent vous voulez pour faire divers bagay, comme ça l'argent fini. Moun pas ça m'a exactement ou te dit ou kay dépenser 10 millions de dollars by pêcheur, qui manière c'est 3 millions de dollars ou dépenser. C'est pour ça yo ka fait ça. Mr. Speaker, et je dis ça toutes les. Mr. Speaker, today I heard from the government that loans can be repurposed. And the member for Castries South, my colleague, mentioned it. I recall the Prime Minister on several occasions talking about the repurposing of loans. They repurpose loans when they feel it's convenient to them, Mr. Speaker. So a loan which was earmarked for agricultural roads can be repurposed. $54 million can be repurposed. So this government has taught me something from their books. They can repurpose this one. But what is a project, Mr. Speaker? They said this is a project. As far as I know, and the World Bank supports this, that a project is a series of tasks that need to be completed in order to reach a specific outcome. A project cycle, Mr. Speaker, we all know, it has design, it has implementation objectives, it tells you who supervises it, it tells you how it will be evaluated. When you speak about a project, it's a specific thing. And when you come to Parliament and speak about COVID-19 project, it's not a program. Projects and programs are different. You come here for $54 million and you say it's a project. So what are the specific tasks? And what is the specific outcome? Is it over 1 year, we want to reduce COVID incidents by 70%? Is it over 2 years, you want to ensure that 5,000 new PPEs are purchased? These are the things you talk about when you speak about a project. So they try to pull the wool over our eyes and speak about a project in the Parliament, but there is nothing about the project preparation, the design, and so on. These are not just the activities of the CMO. And don't tell me they are activities that are in the Social and Economic Recovery Program. That's a different thing. That's a program, it's not a project. Where is the project? You can also define it, Mr. Speaker, as a set of inputs and outputs required to achieve that goal. What are we going to put into this project, this COVID-19 project? What are we putting into it? And what are we going to get out of it? So the Minister for Finance has not, I repeat, not defined this project. Mr. Speaker, the CMO is responsible, as far as we know, for the medical side of things, the monitoring, the testing, and so on. The Minister for Health is the authority who is responsible for ensuring that protocols are put together and protocols are announced. And protocols are gazetted. It comes under her name, Mr. Speaker. Is she the one to monitor this project? Is it the CMO? Will the CMO be the implementing agency? Or is it the Ministry of Finance? When will we know the targets are reached, the benchmarks? How will they coordinate, Mr. Speaker? Do we want better testing? Are we going to purchase more kits? And what is the cost of the evaluation, Mr. Speaker? With COVID-19, I know you can't be exactly specific, but the people who are watching, Mr. Speaker, who are students of South Louis Community College or even the secondary schools, when they speak about projects with their lecturers and their teachers, and they listen to the parliamentarians debate about this COVID-19 project, they are looking for some specifics. On Tuesday, the 10th of November, Mr. Speaker, we came here for US $30 million, and part of it was to fund St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response. So that's another one. So how does the part of the 30 million US dovetail the St. Lucia COVID-19 crisis response and achieving fiscal stability? How does it dovetail into this COVID-19 project? Endless confusion, Mr. Speaker. And all of the money that we have taken, I would wish for the doctors and the medical staff to answer the following questions. Do you have enough testing kits? Over $140-something million, you know, Mr. Speaker. We're not talking about thousands. But are we hearing echoes from the hospitals about testing kits? Or from the medical professionals about testing kits? And we still hearing echoes about PPEs, protective personal equipment. Do they have enough? With all of the millions that we've borrowed, Mr. Speaker. And why are we still hearing complaints about basic medication at our hospitals with all of the millions that we've borrowed? Have we improved the stock of medication, basic medication at the hospitals? The first respondents, the doctors, the medical professionals, the fire service personnel, the police, do they have better equipment? Have we improved the equipment? And these are the questions that come to me, Mr. Speaker. Have we increased transportation? But we are back here for another $54 million. Mr. Speaker, il y a un moment qui, même si le gouvernement a prêté autant d'argent, presque 150 millions de dollars, ou qu'à tant de docteurs, moi quand je dis, est-ce pas tant de docteurs qui dit toujours qu'il n'y a pas ni assez d'équipement? Équipement qui est simple. Équipement pour couvrir quoi, équipement pour tester. Qui manière la pas ni assez, j'ai toujours, Mr. Speaker? Qui manière la pas ni assez, oui, mais c'est l'hôpital là. Owen King, il y a l'hôpital là. St. Jude, c'est Health Center. Qui manière la ni, oui, mais qui simple, qui manière la pas ni? Et que nous avons prêté tous ces millions de dollars ça là. C'est obligé, Mr. Speaker. C'est un autre bagage, ces millions de dollars ça a fait. Et bien, quand, frère, mon parlement de Renov dit, il semble Covid qui a servi pour toute qualité de cette ici. Quand ça déborde du Covid, à l'argent qui a joué dans côté. Et le gouvernement qui a continué à faire le même bagaille qu'il a toujours fait. What about devices, electronic devices for our children? Mr. Speaker, every single day, I get parents who come to my constituency office to speak about the devices for their children. Many of the children cannot attend the classes. Some of them have only one cell phone in the home. And when the parent goes to work with that cell phone, the child cannot do his or her homework. For many people, that's laughable because you have desktop, you have laptop, you have iPad, you have all kinds of things in your home. But for the majority of parents, Mr. Speaker, that is an outcome that should have been top and center. They are ashamed that they stopped the laptop program. So one by one in their constituencies, they are giving 20 over there, they are giving a school 30 over there, you know. The same devices ki gain ki asa, but quietly they are giving them, they are giving them, and no general approach to giving these devices in the country. My colleague said a while ago the Wi-Fi. And if we're talking about COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, all of the experts have said, even though you see vaccines coming up and down, one expert said last night, Mr. Speaker, it's going to take about 3 years for people in the what they call the less developed countries to get all of these vaccines. So this is not something, as the Prime Minister said the last time, oh, we have vaccines, so the terrorism, it look like it may not work like this, Mr. Speaker. So right now, if we are talking about a COVID response project, I want to hear the government talking about Wi-Fi and devices so that our children can at least continue to get lessons and continue to get their schoolwork done. These are the real problems, they are not stories. Parents come every day and ask you to help them buy a tablet, help them buy some device for their child because their children are missing out. And when you read the reports from the World Bank and other agencies, Mr. Speaker, they are talking about a possible lost generation. In terms of education, you might have 1 or 2 years where education will be a scarce commodity for a lot of children, not for all, but for a lot of children. They'll miss several syllabi of work, Mr. Speaker, because of that. So this is an urgent priority. I don't see the government talking about that. And don't talk about it only in your constituencies. We need to address this urgently. Because as the UNDP said, Mr. Speaker, this COVID-19 matter is increasing inequality, especially in the less developed countries, the OECS, Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana. Increasing inequality. So, kisa nou kay ni pli an pli, nou kay ni an situasyon an set lisi, si gouvernement pa adresse zafè bay mamay laptop ou be electronic device pou yo fè travay yo, sa nou kay ni, se pli an pli, nou kay ni an chay pli mamay, ki kay an povte, paske yo pa kay sa jwen ase plas pou yo fè travay l'école yo. An education deficit, Mr. Speaker, is one kind of inequality. It's not because you don't have food today and you don't have food tomorrow that's inequality. Education deficit is also a kind of inequality. Mr. Speaker, very interestingly, in March of 2020, the UNDP out of Barbados said this, and I quote, in March, in the case of most Caribbean countries, in the Eastern Caribbean, the impact of the virus will reinforce existing social and economic vulnerabilities, and inequalities will rise. Therefore, governments must pay attention to health systems, education, tourism, vulnerable populations, and the post-COVID recovery. What did a country like Barbados do? By Friday, October 16th, in addition to all of the protocols all of us are doing, Barbados required travelers to take a second test. October 16th, you know, Mr. Speaker, October 16th. But in St. Lucia, some politicians who believe they are scientists, they are doctors, they are nurses, they are health aid, they are all kinds of things, arguing on television whether we should take a second test or not take a second test. Well, not Barbados. October 16th, today is November 20-something. October 16th, they had already decided that they were taking a second test. Barbados went further, Mr. Speaker. They have a Barbados Welcome Stamp program, remote workers and so on. So there are some governments that are not doing the run-of-the-mill everyday thing. They're trying creative things. What was our government doing then, Mr. Speaker? What was our government doing then? Boasting. They are number one in the world and we have the best CMO, all kinds of theater. That's what they were doing. That's what they were doing. And banging their hands on the desk when we said possibly tourists are bringing in COVID. And the Prime Minister saying the opposition is disgusting. That's what they were doing. Yes? Yeah, he said our behavior is disgusting downstairs. It's in the media. Check Facebook. He said that. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what was happening in St. Lucia. When the UNDP and all the experts were providing direction, that's what was happening. I'm speaking about a COVID-19 response project. So St. Lucia does not have a project. We have various COVID-19 programs. And so Ministry of Agriculture has a program. The CMO doing their medical expert thing, the testing and providing the results. Then you have another agency doing another program. Then tourism doing a program. One thing, opening the borders. Then they wait, England closed there, then they do something else. And then the Prime Minister says, then the government says, it's good that the United States is not shutting down. It's good for us in the Caribbean. All kinds of confusing rhetoric, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, listen to what a consultant to the Caribbean Council said. I'm sure you know him, Mr. Speaker. If I may. I know, Mr. Speaker, you have read many articles from David Jessup. I like this gentleman. An avid Caribbean writer. He's from Olio? I doubt it. Mr. Speaker, here is what he said in March again. In March, listen to this well. He said, a post-virus economic recovery strategy requires thought now. That's in March. And here is what he said, and I quote, the next 6 months will indicate which governments have done their best, anticipated problems before they arose, have been honest and provided detailed financial information, factual information, rather than hoping inaction, half-truths, rather than hoping that inaction or half-truths will somehow see them through, unquote. Let me read that again. The next 6 months will indicate which governments have done their best, anticipated problems before they arose, have been honest and provided detailed, factual information, rather than hoping that inaction or half-truths will somehow see them through, unquote. That was in March. So David Jessup was painting a picture of how you will evaluate Caribbean governments. We are in November. I leave it to you, Mr. Speaker, and honorable members, and all those who are listening to me, to judge this government against what David Jessup wrote in March. And so the question is, which is it, as the leader of the opposition asked? Is it the 579.3 million economic recovery plan of the Prime Minister? Because this economic and social stabilization plan, which you presented, you said it will cost 579.3 million. Is it the COVID crisis response which you got from the 30 million? Which is it? Or is it the programs that you have already presented in the budget? Because this government, Mr. Speaker, is adamant that the projects will continue. They are adamant that the projects will continue. And although there are organizations, the World Bank and others, they will tell you in crisis times, there are times you need to invest in capital projects to stimulate down the road long-term economic recovery. They are very quick to tell you, Mr. Speaker, if you are not efficient, if you don't have procurement rules and so on, you'll be wasting your time. And it's not that they're saying capital projects are not important. What they are saying, they're advising to do exactly, they're advising the opposite of what this government is doing. Large capital projects with zero procurement. Direct awards, all of them. So which is it? Tell the people of St. Lucia exactly which is it when the Mr. Prime Minister, when you rebut. Tell us exactly what the COVID-19 response project is. How much will it cost? The project, not all the programs and the bridges and all of the things, the roads and all of them put together. The COVID-19 response project, how much will it cost? So there is no project really, because you have no stated objectives. Anybody who goes to Form 4, Form 3, or even at primary school, they do that now in business training, that you need some objectives. This government has no objectives for the COVID-19 response or recovery. There are no objectives. So every day we have more cases. They run and turn to see what policy responses they will have. Should we close the country? Should we not close the country? Should we close the bars? Should we do this? Should we do that? There are no timelines. There are no monitoring mechanisms as far as the Prime Minister presented. And there are no evaluating mechanisms as far as the Prime Minister presented. So how will the people of St. Lucia know when we have achieved this COVID-19 response project? When will we know? Is it when there are no more cases, as they did before? They were jumping up and gloating because we were not recording cases, but people in the communities were losing their jobs and can't send their children to school, but they were jumping up and gloating that they were doing well. So at the time, the measurement was that we were not getting cases. So you see why I'm so worried? Because they don't know which measurement they're going to use. Is it when the CMO says no more cases? So success, they're jumping up and clapping. But there are several people in the communities, okay, who can't feed their children. So is that success? Simply not getting cases is not success enough. So what is your success benchmark? I am a big guru on project management or anything, but at least I was a school teacher. I know you have to plan, you have to have objectives, you have to have plans, you have to have strategy, or you have to have all kinds of things, or else the principal will not approve your lesson plan, your scheme and record, and other people who work at banks and in businesses and everywhere. You have to have some objectives. This government, they have no objectives. They want to cloud us so they can do what they want. And you can't judge them on any specific thing. So, Mr. Speaker, as I told you before, this government has no COVID-19 response project. There is no clear rationale for this loan. We know we need assistance for COVID-19, and that's the exact muddy water that they want so they can do what they want. Just as you put horses before hospitals, just as you spent millions of dollars on a new structure at Auger because you say in St. Jude somebody's arms could not fill the door. Cantonment. Just as the Cabot lands, our NIC funds were given access to. So government gets funds in the name of COVID to continue its projects regardless. And no matter what you say, Mr. Speaker, I don't listen, I let the jackasses bray. That's what the Prime Minister said publicly. So there is no COVID-19 response project, none at all. So what shall I tell my constituents? What will I say to my constituents? That the government has borrowed another $54 million. There's no concept paper, no explanation by the PM, just a mention in the motion. And how will they benefit from the $54 million? Comment les gens viennent pour nous qui jouent un bénéfice? Moun qui affecté par COVID-19 là. À 54 millions de dollars qui le gouvernement a prêté aujourd'hui encore. En haut, 150 millions de dollars qui ont prêté. What will I tell fishers like Danny and Curious George and Albert Edman and Robert Daniel and Leisure Baptiste and Jesse Edgar about fishing? What does the government have in place for them? Yes, Viewfort and Viewfort North, Servants Bay also. What will I tell them? For they know that the government only came up with $500 because they protested. And that's how the government squeezed $500 for them. What will you tell them in this COVID-19 zero project? And because of COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, what will I tell the CMOS farmers? They stayed home for a week because of COVID-19, the government's order. And now the government is coming with a COVID-19 project. How will they benefit from this project? What will I tell Melton, Maffrey, Randy, Paul, and Petula Joseph? What will I tell them? Mr. Speaker, the health aides, those who work at the health centers, have they received new clothing? Have they received new allowances for clothing? Have they received a bonus? So how will Anastasia, Louis, Aness, and Petrona Clovis from Viewfort North benefit from this and others? And the bus drivers, how will they benefit? First of all, Mr. Speaker, a good place for the government to start in terms of defining this project is to admit that they were wrong on all counts. The Prime Minister must admit that he was wrong saying backdoor is the reason for the increase in COVID-19 in St. Lucia. He must admit that he was wrong.
Yes, the batch was responsible, not the backdoor.
The government must admit that they're the ones fueling the politics in this COVID-19 debate. Throughout the time in this parliament, they're saying it's the Labour Party responsible for increasing COVID-19. And they're all around having conferences with young people without masks. Even the weekend gone past, there are pictures today on television showing the potential candidates without mask campaigning in Beaufort South. So what is it?
Who's that?
First of all, they must admit that. Mr. Speaker, they must also say that it is time for them to admit that it is not only St. Lucians in St. Lucia who sometimes can be careless, but our visitors at the hotels are possible transmitters of the COVID-19. It's time for the government to admit that. And so the Prime Minister must not come to this house, Mr. Speaker, and try to behave as if everything is fine. And we must all come together because it's COVID-19 and at the same time fueling political fire in this house and outside. So comment à faire, Mr. Speaker? Je veux dire ça. Encore on a dit, le gouvernement mettait motion comme ça parce qu'ils peuvent nous mettre nous directement en laissant de dépenser l'argent là. Est-ce que péché vieux faut que tu fasses rien? Pour ce péché à te jouer dans bagaille, Mr. Speaker, je te dis pour montrer casse-tu. Et piger gouvernement. Et là, piger dans le gouvernement. Gouvernement va $500. So, si ce péché à te pour piger gouvernement, qui ça y a joué dans besoin? Mr. Speaker, je dis gouvernement, même quand il a commencé à biger, c'est même quand il a continué. Même quand il a mis des cheval avant l'hôpital. Même quand il a dépensé millions de dollars à faire l'autre building, parce qu'il y a des buildings, c'est un là pas bon. Et que vous voyez madame pour ouvrir boire à la porte building pour dire la porte là pas bon. C'est comme ça qu'il a continué. Et la parmi pièce COVID-19 project qui spécialement le project 19. COVID-19. Même comme M. Speaker, il a servi ces cabottes là, avec l'argent pension moun. Il a joué l'argent depuis du Covid pour dépenser avec le Premier ministre l'a dit, il ne peut pas coûter personne. M. Speaker, ça m'a dit assez. Si le gouvernement veut déclarer un projet en les affaires Covid-19 là, commencez avec dire qui n'a pas dit la vérité. Commencez avec dire que le Premier ministre a dit c'est quand même les gens sortis backdoor. Qui partent ça, ça a été dit, il était qu'à faire, et qui partent ça, et qui était qu'à dire esprit. Le gouvernement ni pour dire que les autres dit qui touristes pas qu'à mener pièce quand il Covid, qui ont parti ça, ça a dit, et qui était qu'à dire esprit pour mettre cette lycée à terre. Le gouvernement ni pour déclarer qu'il est nous qu'a dit tester ces touristes là encore. Avec eux qu'a dit non. Je ne vais pas pour tester les touristes. Je vais dire, Mr. Speaker, hier, une grande organisation en Amérique qui va appeler CDC, ils ont dit touristes pour jeunes travelers. Nous pour jeunes pas un test, pas deux tests, mais 3 tests. Ah, Amérique parle à besoin. Vous comprenez ça d'aller. You know that in a while, Mr. Speaker. So the same things the locals were saying in St. Lucia, the CDC of the United States has made it even more onerous. They say not 1 test, not 2 tests, but 3. I can guarantee you, now that the United States has spoken, it's not St. Lucian doctors, or it's not St. Lucian scientists who say it, you will hear the government bending to the tune, Mr. Speaker. You will hear the government bending to the tune. So I say, Mr. Speaker, There is no COVID-19 response project. This government simply has some programs that they are framing, that they are saying is a project. There's no project, there's no evidence of a project, and they are using the $54 million to carry on the same projects without due consideration to structural changes and very deep social and economic assistance to the people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. I thank you very much.